It's so wonderful to see everyone here this morning at Live Oak. This is our spiritual home, where we come as independent thinking people to celebrate the common thread of interdependence, which weaves us all into the larger family of humanity. It is where seeking meets understanding, where longing finds peace, where we enjoy each other's company, share life stories, and build lifelong friendships. Today, I have the pleasure of serving as worship associate for my fellow worship associate, Drew Carter. Drew's been a member of Live Oak for over a dozen years and has served in many capacities here. He has been a pastoral care associate, table host with the membership ministry, working with worship, and of course, the choir. And sometimes he's even served as worship associate and choir member on the same Sunday. He also teaches at UCSB in his spare time, and he's really the nicest man you'll ever meet.
The call to worship this morning borrows from the inscription on the shrine of the Sufi mystic Rumi in Konya, Turkey. Come, come, whoever you are. Join with us this morning. We are all preparing to worship together. Wanderer, coming here to explore the world and find something new. New people and a new way to worship. Worshipper, joining our old friends that know the way, but come each week because we know how important it is to come together. Lover of leaving, returning to a new Sunday morning, different from what we've left behind. This is no caravan of despair. We gather here to connect and bring each other hope. Hope for a new world, a world full of peace and justice. Even though you have transgressed 1,000 times, we do not ask if you are worthy. We do not demand that you toe the line. Come, yet again come. This morning and each morning, you are welcome here. Let us worship together. My family is like a United Nations of religious practices. My mom still attends a mainline Methodist church. She reads the Bible and talks to God every night. She also talks to my dad, who passed away last August. The church offers her comfort and a community. My sister found her way to an evangelical congregation. She and her husband raised their kids with a more conservative view of the world. My brother takes his children on Sunday morning to Hebrew school and celebrates the holidays of both his family and his wife's traditions. My wife doesn't attend any services, but she is deeply intrigued by both Catholic and Buddhism. She has an ancestral attachment to the Catholic Church and tells the story of how her Sicilian grandmother performed an emergency baptism on her as a child. She tells me it's theologically sound. Pope Francis and Thich Nhat Hanh are equally fascinating figures in her seeking. As the Unitarian Universalist living out here in California, I am, of course, the black sheep of the family. But as my mom says, at least I have somewhere to go on Sunday morning. Live Oak is more than that. And the people here have taught me ways to bridge these differences. Because it used to be a struggle. I have this vivid memory of a moment in my young adulthood when I couldn't get out of attending services at my parents' Methodist church. It will mean a lot to your mom. It's always a compelling argument. So this was after I had lost my Christian faith and had become, in the way of new converts, a great believer in a young man's atheism, non-belief, and skepticism with a capital S. I rejected everything, anything that hinted at religion, chicanery, or hocus pocus. Even more, I saw other people who still held these beliefs as wrong. They were in the grips of an institution with the worst possible of motives, the opiate of the masses, the patriarchy, the man, keeping everyone in their place. Only I could see through the smoke screen and recognize the fairy stories for what they were. And if I could see the truth, didn't I need to pull the others out of their delusions? Now, in the end, this was not a very effective way to approach the world for me. And it certainly was not on that moment. Because there I was, and I was trying to figure out what was the most honest thing for me to do. Now, maybe I should have refused on principle to even walk through the doors, but once I'm there, do I pray along? Do I stand in silent protest during the hymns? What about the statements of faith and the praise to a God I didn't believe in? It was deeply uncomfortable for me, and I hope that there aren't any young adults here this morning with mom and dad going through the same thing. But I had no option. I had nothing else to do but just suffer through it. Now, years later, I came to Live Oak looking for that community that I remembered from my youth, without the religiosity that I had found so troubling. I really didn't have in mind an opening up of my spiritual horizons. I just needed to feel a part of something. And I needed help. Help for when the demands of life became too much for one person or two people to handle. And I certainly found all of that here. What I also found was a community that has as one of its core animating principles that we welcome all people. In her December sermon about the G word, Reverend Tamara talked about our tradition as a broad tent encompassing many beliefs and the challenges of communicating with each other despite our many names for God. This acceptance is the core of how we think about this congregation. I bet that whenever you tell someone else about Unitarianism, someone outside of Live Oak, you fall back on eventually something like, you can believe whatever you want. Now, whether or not that's correct theologically, there's a good reason why we say that. It's a breath of fresh air to have a religious community not quite sound so religious about things. This morning I want to take this a little farther. While our mission statement and our principles say in no uncertain terms that our congregation welcomes you here, what do those principles require of you in return? Right? It's the whole community that has diverse beliefs. I have only my one way of understanding things. Now, I may evolve and I may contain contradictions, but a full diversity of beliefs does not reside within me. Nonetheless, there's an important lesson in our welcoming principles that does extend down to each one of us as individuals. We can live with openness and understanding. These, in turn, can be used not only with each other within these walls, but in our most challenging relationships out in the world. Along my journey as a member of this congregation, I absorbed this key idea, that to be accepted, I had to be accepting of a diversity of beliefs. Now, I know that isn't always as easy as it sounds. You may be familiar with this feeling. Hear a statement from the pulpit, or see some particular action that sets off something in my gut, and deep down, something's telling me that I'm just not buying it. I just can't get on this train. Now, on my best days, I use that feeling to learn about acceptance. I sit with the conflict and hope for understanding. In my weaker moments, the best I can do is just tell myself, don't be judgy. In time, I have found that these lessons accumulate and lead to an ability to set things aside. I try to remember times when it was me reaching out in a new spiritual direction, making mistakes, trying out radical thoughts. So when I see that from others, I let my openness and curiosity fight back against my reflective skepticism. Well, okay, maybe just join forces with my reflexive skepticism. I have found that this leads my reactions and my interactions into a positive realm and away from these conflicts. And this has been an unexpected gift that Live Oak has brought me, that you have brought me. A new perspective on a theology of everyone. I found great value in having this attitude of curiosity towards others' beliefs, and the sincere understanding that we can learn from each other's experience of the divine. One that doesn't have to threaten what I know is truth, but leads to connections across obstacles that seem to divide us. Being part of this community has challenged me to be more open to the beliefs of others. It asks me to make sense of the world as it is experienced by others, and not just as I see it. After I graduated from college, I spent 2 years as a volunteer teaching in Zimbabwe in southern Africa. My students had religious beliefs that were very strong traditional Christian beliefs, and they also had many traditions related to a spirit world. Then one night I was sitting with some of the other American teachers, volunteers, when the topic of demon possessions came up. Now this was an aspect of traditional Zimbabwean culture that many of us had witnessed in our rural school communities. Typically, a student would collapse on the ground and then begin yelling out or convulsing or going into some catatonic state. Needless to say, it was very upsetting to us. And we were trying to make sense of it. So our first attempt at understanding was via the psychology of a teenage girl. So it was invariably the girls that were the victims of these possessions. She grew up in a strict, traditional society that didn't allow her many ways of acting out. And this was the only way she'd be able to yell obscenities in the middle of the school and then have it mostly dismissed later on. See, it all makes sense. It's psychopathology. But then one of the other volunteers spoke up. She was an African-American woman from Georgia, and she set us straight. These girls were possessed. There's no amount of play acting that could bring them to the states of agitation that they demonstrated. My rationalizations and disbelief made me feel better, but their dignity demands that I see that what they were going through as real. That girl really has become a serpent that is crawling back to the hills unless the demon can be answered. The truth of the situation demands something more than my dismissal. Okay, this is a particularly thorny example, and the nature of the experience clearly demanded that I couldn't walk in and wish away the reality of the people involved. Just as I couldn't shut down the morning services at Bethany United Methodist Church, simply by folding my arms and refusing to participate in the hymns. Plus, singing the hymns is the best part. So. In some way, I needed to accept the reality as experienced by my friends and family, even when it is at odds with my worldview. If I deny that they are seeing the world that they are seeing, then I'm not respecting their worth as a person, and I'm not allowing them to speak to me. And more importantly, there is something in it for me. I gain deeper understanding. The experience of having a sincere observation of spiritual traditions with others can be powerful and illuminating. It can serve to soothe our heart and bring us into a closer relationship. Now, to be honest, most of the time I only buy into a weak version of this argument. Look, when I go to the Methodist Church, they talk about Jesus a lot. There are things which are said that glance off me uncomfortably, references to the evils of the world as a result of lack of faith. I have to dance carefully along, trying not to let the discordant notes throw me. Professions of the divine are always the most difficult for a Unitarian Universalist to just let pass. Calling out the names of God, or attesting to the supremacy of one God above all others, or even just referring to the words of one book as without error, makes me stop and check my core understanding. Sidestepping these most problematic areas may be the best strategy. One Christmas, my wife and I decided to attend the early morning service at the Santa Barbara Mission. They had a nativity scene set up front with live sheep and donkeys. It was beautiful. The sanctuary has been designed so that near the winter solstice, the sun rises exactly at the front door and shines all the way down the aisle to the altar at the front. That must really be a pain for the worship association. But from the congregation, the natural sunshine forms a beautiful juxtaposition with the construction of the ornate altar. And while I've heard it was originally designed to celebrate the solstice and the seasons, I think that morning it served as a proper way to herald the coming of a mystical, godly child, who, in the words of the Bible, was coming to bring light unto the world. It was a special, holy day that they shared with me. There were visiting bishops in resplendent finery and tall hats, a brass quartet ringing out from the rafters, literally trumpeting the joy of the occasion. Little children in their fine jackets and dresses wriggling uncomfortably, eager to get back to Christmas chocolates. The choir singing out, "Hark, the herald angels sing." It was a celebration of tradition and the generations that had come before us. Uplifting, moving, and joyous. In reaching out to other traditions, there are two mistakes which I try to avoid: being a tourist or being a butterfly. First and foremost, I don't want to be a tourist who jumps in and takes pictures of the altar. Everyone takes their own tradition seriously. It's never a show being put on for my benefit. It's disrespectful not to engage completely. And if I just sit in the balcony and watch, then I won't get anything out of the experience. To some degree or another, I think we are all striving for a shared experience of the divine. And worship lets us sit within our circles and reach out to each other and to the things beyond ourselves. Only by being present and committed in that moment with them can I truly participate. However, I'm also aware that I'm not joining them in their traditions. I'm not a butterfly flitting from flower to flower of religions. I'm not a postmodern Catholic, Buddhist, neo-pagan, Sufi mystic. Because maybe it is not my place to actually be part of their community. Maybe that would require more than what I am capable. Maybe I am just visiting. In any case, I shouldn't give up my own beliefs or let go of my own true self and my deeply held values. I try never to let go of that skeptical bird that sits on my shoulder and provides me with my doubts. I just try not to be the man on that bird's shoulder. Try not to let him take over. For New Year's, my wife and I went to the Mahankala Buddhist Center. The building was much less grand than the mission, but they were clearly trying to evoke a similar feel, with candles and many representations of the divine. We stood as the monk, who was the teacher and worship leader, processed in. Instead of an ornate hat, he wore the austerity of a shaved head. The ceremony included silence, singing, and chanting and a lesson. We sat collectively in silence much as we did here this morning. We manifested our wishes for peace for the planet and understanding for all peoples. It was a small gathering, packed into a small room, so that our collective presence was palpable. We chanted a litany, the words repeating so that their sound could reverberate between and us and within me. I did my best to lend my energy to the objectives of the gathering and not to sit apart from it. I was able to share in the wisdom that morning. I left with a profound calm and a feeling of strength. Hope for new beginnings. Because sharing in worship like that connects us in ways that unlike anything else. On August 14th, 2014, my aunt called me from my parents' home in Maryland. My dad's cancer had left him very weak and he was in pain. The Reverend DeHart, their minister, was coming over to perform a communion ceremony at my dad's bedside with the family. My mom and sister and my aunts and uncles were there. My brother and I were going to join via the phone. My dad seemed a little confused as to who was talking out of which speaker. But then Reverend DeHart began the familiar liturgy of the communion ceremony. I hadn't heard it in 25 years, but I still knew it very well. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Reverend DeHart had gotten a special form of the bread and grape juice, which my father could take even though he couldn't swallow because he was on a feeding tube. The blood of Christ is shed for you. These traditional words brought clarity to my dad. We were all together in a familiar place. Reverend DeHart finished the ceremony with a prayer. But we all felt that the moment needed more time and more weight. So my dad suggested that we sing a hymn. Amazing Grace was one that we all knew. Just the first verse. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Over the phone and in person, we all sang together as a prayer for the presence of the divine at that moment of our lives. Reaching out towards the unknown, with the hope that something would bring us comfort, and finding that comfort in each other. As it was over, they passed the phone to my dad, and I made sure that he understood that I had been there with him. And he said he knew. And he needed all of us there that moment. His faith and his family were the most important thing to him in those days. And through his beliefs and that ceremony that we all knew, we were connected together. A connection that is always there, but can otherwise be hard to feel, to really experience. I was there with him, and he will always be with me. That night, his struggle with disease came to an end, and he passed away peacefully. We all have our beliefs that define who we are and how we see the world, even as they evolve. This congregation asserts that all of these paths are correct, even as individually we only have our own soul to save. And by that I mean we each take responsibility for our own journey towards truth and meaning. What does it mean then to be a Unitarian Universalist if we welcome everyone who comes through these doors? Don't I really think some of you are wrong? Don't you really think I'm nuts? I hope that there is a path which embraces multiple beliefs, that acknowledges the inherent worth and dignity of all people, both inside these doors and out, that uses mutual understanding to bridge our differences and helps me see that your differences are the very things that enrich my life. May it be so.